Hi, beauties. Before we get into today's show, I wanted to take a minute because for those of you who've been listening for a while, first of all, thank you so much. But you will notice a small change in the top of the show today. And that's because when we started this show in 2018, we really wanted a place where we could talk honestly and candidly about beauty without having brands pay us to say, well, what they wanted us to say. And when we started, we were having fun. It was a passion project. And we came up with this tagline, the real truth about the fake shit. We were talking about plastic surgery. It was a lot of fun. But since then, and almost over 200 episodes later, we realized that we're talking about real stuff and stuff that's really important. And so we are tweaking our tagline a little bit to be always reaching for truth and beauty. Why is that important? Because the brands are still not paying us to be on the show. And that allows us to have these candid conversations with experts, with founders about everything from hot products to technologies and everything in between. And I hope that you will appreciate this new change. I think it's just a small tweak in our evolution of bringing you content that matters, because at the end of the day, we want you to be informed so you can make the best decisions for yourself. And I couldn't kick off this new branding than with a better, more exciting guest. We are talking today to the founder of Citrus Labs about clinical testing, how we can understand that, how we can see through the claims. And I think you're going to love it. So thank you so much for your continued support. Enjoy the show. This is the Art Beauty Podcast, where we are always reaching for truth in beauty. Now, remember, this is an unsponsored podcast, which means the brands who are on here are not paying to be on here, which allows us to have honest and candid conversations, because at the end of the day, we believe you deserve to be informed so you can make the best choice for yourself. I'm Amber, and today my fabulous co-host is Susanne Mitschke. She is the CEO and founder of Citrus Labs, and I could not imagine having a better show to kick off our new branding with than with you, Susanne. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
So, part of this, idea is when we started this podcast, we wanted a space where we could talk candidly and honestly with brands like yourselves, about the products. But one of the things that is so fascinating, why I'm so excited today, is because so many of us who have bought a product, who've done even like the most basic research on a product, have seen the term clinically proven, clinically tested, clinical trials, and in the spirit of education, I'm so excited to have you on, because Citrus Labs is where a lot of these clinical studies happen, correct, for beauty?
Yeah, that is correct. So basically what Citrus Labs does is we conduct clinical studies
Okay.
on behalf of consumer brands like skincare. We also do supplements, superfoods, devices. And then, we help these brands to actually make research-backed product claims. And the prime example of our work is a claim like 75% reduction in the appearance of fine lines and wrinkles.
Right. And so we've all heard these before. And what I'm hoping today is for us to talk a little bit about what that process is with you, so that we know how to sort of interpolate that data, how we know how to make sure that that's data that we want to follow. Also to talk about the difference between things like clinical perception studies
Mhm.
and then also like clinical research studies, and kind of to understand a little bit more of the claim. So let's get right into it. When a company approaches you, like a skincare company, what goes into doing a clinical study? What goes into doing this clinical research and making those claims?
Yeah. So if you specifically look at the cosmetics, the beauty space, beauty has conducted clinicals since forever. And typically, what you need to launch a brand is obviously a product. You need a website, you need typically an Instagram account, and typically either a clinical trial or a consumer perception study to then substantiate product claims. And at this point, most of these brands have clinicals attached to them, which is, as I mentioned, either perception or an actual clinical trial. In most cases, for cosmetics, though, it is a perception study. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more what the difference is, because I think this
Yeah.
is what you're probably interested in.
Well,
So
well,
let's,
well,
oh yeah.
before we get into the two types of studies, I know that beauty, cosmetics, skincare, it's a highly sort of unregulated industry. However, from what I understand, now I used to work with Murad, and I know that working with QVC takes its clinicals and making those claims very seriously. And especially when it comes to marketing, if you're going to make a claim, there has to be, it has to be substantiated, right? So
Yep, that is
okay,
correct.
so that these clinical, when you're talking about clinicals, and we're going to talk about the difference between sort of a clinical study and a perception study, but
Yep,
they have to have actual like truth and science and fact behind them, correct?
they should have, yes.
Okay. Okay, but they don't have to. Is there regulation on that?
So there is a new regulation called MOCRA. I think it stands for the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act, and it's actually the first change in regulation of these personal care products since I think it's 1938. So since a very long time, and now we are seeing in this new regulation actually mandatory safety substantiation, but at the same time, the FTC actually also submitted new regulation around how to actually substantiate claims. So that is very interesting now. So you actually have to have, for claim substantiation, you have to have clinical backing. But then obviously the claims you see, we don't know if, in most cases, we don't know who conducted the study. We don't know how big the sample size was, and we don't know if they might have done some statistical calculations in the background, maybe left out some groups. So this is all, not regulated.
Okay, so let's get into, let's start at the beginning because I'm assuming that everybody else is as fascinated with this as I am. So when it comes to, clinicals, what are the different types of studies that brands can be doing right now?
Yeah, so clinical trials in cosmetics are research studies that evaluate if a product works and basically does what it's supposed to do. For example, I have a moisturizer. The goal of a moisturizer is to hydrate. And maybe I want to make some claims around, obviously hydration, maybe even fine lines, wrinkles, skin texture, glow. So the clinical study then would assess, obviously, first and foremost, hydration, and then also would look how, fine lines and wrinkles develop, how my skin texture changes, and also if I get a nice glow. Now, clinical trials are not clinical trials. Um, Especially in skincare, I see that clinical trials and consumer perception studies are actually often used interchangeably. But, as we already established, there is a huge difference. Clinical trials typically involve objective data measurement. For example, they involve a skin analyzer that objectively measures things like wrinkles, fine lines, hyperpigmentation, sensitive skin parts, as seen in rosacea, for example, UV damage, brown spots, skin moisture. Objective data measurement can also happen through instruments like a corneometer, a catometer, or a tuameter. And then there's also expert skin grading done by a dermatologist, which also is objective data measurement. And then typically clinical trials involve statistical data analysis. And then you can make claims like significantly improve skin hydration.
Right.
And also if you test a product against a placebo, you can also say increases hydration by X% significantly greater than a placebo. But testing against the placebo is very rare, unfortunately, in cosmetics. And then we have perception studies. Perception studies are more subjective. They only involve questionnaires. And frankly, there can also be a huge difference in these questionnaires. For example, a higher standard is when you have a questionnaire that uses a Likert scale from 1 to 5. And you have, for example, the question, how would you rate your dark circles under eyes? And then go, number 1, not noticeable. Number 2, barely noticeable. number 3, mild, number 4, moderate, and then number 5, severe. Then the same question can be asked in a different way. You can ask, do you agree or disagree that your dark circles under eye improves? And then you go 1 to 5, from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And basically that gives you a better chance to have like a claim like X% agree that their under eye dark circles improved. And then you have actually a third option for a question. You can do like, do you agree that your dark circles under your eyes improved compared to when you first started using the product? And then you just have yes or no.
Right.
And typically the best questions that I always have to smile on is when they're around hydration, right? When you have a super hydrating moisturizer and then ask like, do you agree that your skin feels more hydrated after using that product? Of course, any person would say yes. And then you have these claims that state like 100% of participants agree.
You bring up a good point. Is there any way, so just, I want to make sure that I'm clear. So a clinical trial is something that is generally more scientifically backed,
Yep, yep,
objective data using scientific measurements. I know we had Dr. Murad on a show once, and he talked about a product that he was doing that actually did skin puncture, like a skin punch test, and they were looking at this under a microscope. So
yep.
those are really scientific claims. Versus these consumer perception, which, not that they're not important, but then have maybe a greater degree of variability. Is there any way for us to be able to read into those and decipher them?
Yeah, so, first of all, when something sounds too good to be true, it typically is. And
Right,
generally, when I see something that states 100% said and
right,
100% agree, to me, this is a super, super red flag. And of course, their products achieve all of that in 2 to 4 weeks. To me, I highly doubt that, especially as our skin typically needs about 30 days to show any results, because that is how long skin cells turn over. The exception is a moisturizer. You pretty much know immediately if it helps, if it works or not. But um, interestingly, for me and also my work, is that most of our clients are actually mad when they don't get results in the high 90s or even 100% claims. But then when you look at a company like SkinCeuticals, for
right.
example, they are like the holy grail, right? The super science forward brand. Their CE Ferulic, which I think is their best seller, that vitamin C serum, has results in the 20 to 30%. And that is something that I can get behind. Like, 30 something percent said that their firmness increased, 30% reduction in the appearance of wrinkles. These are like results that are actually coming from clinical studies. Um, and that is
Wow.
great. And a 30% decrease in fine lines wrinkles is actually really, really meaningful.
Yeah. Now so it's funny. I get to go in my career. I've gotten to go to a lot of different launch events. I see a lot of the time with these non-invasive procedures. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
I'm there looking at their before and afters, and I'm like, well, okay, her neck in one picture, it was like this, and then the other one, it's like this.
Yeah.
So of course it looks a lot better. Or, you can tell, like, sometimes they're hunched over, so her stomach looks a little more flabby, and then she's standing up straight. I think brands have gotten better at this. I'm talking about, like, 15 years ago, I used to go and be like, really, are you trying to pull that over on us? But nowadays, I will see a lot of these studies, and then sometimes, looking at the sample size, that's important too, right? Because sometimes I'll see something and it's like, in a study of 20 people, 100% said this, but it's 20 people. Or is that kind of a normal sample
I
size?
think 20 people is quite low. Obviously, and so each study should have a power calculation, um, and to basically get to choose the sample size that you can make statistically significant, claims. But 20 people seems fairly low. But typically, that is again what we see specifically in perception studies. And also, it's funny that you mentioned before and after photos. Often, when we work with brands, they are coming to us with examples from other brands, and they tell us, I want professional before and afters, and I want them to look like this. And then we look at the photos, and they clearly show a model, and they were clearly taken in a studio, and the results are obviously amazing. It's like, person has
Right.
severe acne, and then 12 weeks later all of their pimples are gone.
Right.
And it basically gets sometimes to a point where I think the ethics of running an objective clinical trial or even a fairly objective perception study are a little stretched.
Gosh, so I mean, is there anything that a consumer can do? We hear these terms and of course they sound really powerful, but like, I know you said if it, maybe if it sounds too good to be true, it might just be. Is there anything else that we can be looking for?
So we try to push our clients to be more transparent. And I think the more transparent the brands are, the better they are. Um, because looking at study results, right? Most of them put something on their website like, based on a third party clinical trial. But again, who conducted this clinical trial, right? Is it like, was it qualified people that were actually, third party, or was it your cousin who's a dermatologist, or was it a marketing agency that, sells perception studies and markets them as clinical trials? So we are really pushing our clients to actually tell who the study ran, in this case, citrus apps, and then also link, if it was a clinical study, link to the clinicaltrials.gov page, which
Right.
is basically a registry where all clinical trials are registered. And then anybody can read about the methodologies.
Right.
Methodologies meaning, what kind of assessment was used. Was it a skin analyzer? Was it an instrument? Was it um, expert skin grading done by a dermatologist? And also talking a little bit about, questionnaires, because all studies involve questionnaires, even when, they are clinical trials that also include objective data. They also include questionnaires. How are these questionnaires structured, for example? And that, gives you as a consumer more transparency, and also, gives you a chance to interpret these results.
So now, does every clinical trial have to be registered on clinicaltrials.gov?
Unfortunately, there is no law, no regulation that basic, because it's cosmetics, right? Cosmetics don't need to get registered. But for me personally, I think it's best practice. We talked previously a little bit about MOCRA, right? That
Right.
that new regulation that came out, and I think it's a step in the right direction. But especially for consumers, transparency, making misleading false claims, I think they really need to, push it more towards, we have the good manufacturing practices. Maybe we also need good clinical trial practices.
Yeah, it's funny too, because I know when it comes to claims legally, like brands, you said it at the beginning, this can improve the appearance of
Hmm.
longer, fuller lashes. They're not saying it's going to give you longer, fuller lashes because they can't necessarily guarantee that, right? But it's
They also are not allowed to do that because that's a drug claim.
that's a drug claim. Got it. Okay,
Yes.
so can what is a drug claim entitled? Like what does
So
that?
for example, oh yeah, so for example, acne. Acne is a skin condition. Acne is a health condition. And you cannot say, if you're cosmetic, you cannot say that this product reduces acne. That would be a health claim. And that is, flagged by the FDA, because now you are basically falling under FDA regulation. But you can say it reduces the appearance of
Right.
acne.
Wow. And so I guess because I see that in a lot of like hair growth serums or like lash
Oh,
serums,
yes. Yeah,
because I guess hair loss would be a medical condition, alopecia.
it is. Yep,
So they
it is a
can't make those
medical
claims.
condition. No,
But I
they
guess
can't make those claims.
they don't look at aging and wrinkles as a medical condition.
No, that is not dramatic. That is just, our body doing stuff.
Got it. Got it. So, I mean, I feel like this is so fascinating. Do you have any thoughts? So, some cosmetic brands are actually owned by medical companies.
Yeah.
So I know, Skin Medica is one of them. And I know that they have to be very careful about the claims that they're making because they, as a brand, do fall under um, other regulations. Is it the FDA that they fall under?
Yeah. I think it really comes down to, so we actually work with a law group that is only focusing on these claims for cosmetic companies and also supplement companies, and they always tell everybody that it always comes down to the risk profile of a brand. Some brands, you know, don't worry about the FDA sending them a warning letter because they can make their fine, right? Once they are penalized, they have to pay a fine, and then they can make that with that claim in like a week or two, and it's fine, right? But other brands are a little bit more conservative when it comes to how they are making claims, and I think most of small brands are conservative how they are making claims, and then you see the appearance claims. The thing is that also how the claims are phrased does not necessarily show you if it was if it was an actual clinical trial or a perception study, because again, coming down to the risk profile, we have many clients that decided to invest in a full clinical trial, sometimes even with a placebo, with skin analysis, instruments, and expert skin grading, but their claims still look as if they would have conducted a perception study, just because this is how they decided they are phrasing their claims.
So how so? Because I feel like the perceptions are like 99% of consumers say generally. So how would they
Mhm.
take a clinical one and make it sound like a consumer one?
Like, for example, 50% showed, 50% presented with, instead of saying, 20% reduction in wrinkles.
Got it. Oh my gosh. So this terminology is nuts. I have to ask you, just as a fellow consumer, are there brands that you really get behind? Are you allowed to say?
Yeah, I love most of our brands.
But now these brands that you do
Uh,
the study with, like, you don't have any, they're hiring you, right? As a third party, you don't have any sort of affiliation or anything to
no,
them,
we
correct? Okay.
no, we don't have any affiliation. Obviously, I do test a lot of these products myself, and I do have a lot of brands that I love and that I probably would not have, you know, bought at Sephora if I would have seen them. But some of the brands we work with, they are really science forward, and they have really really good products.
Well, tell us. I mean, let's get
Okay,
on that. Are you allowed to tell us some of them? I love this.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, of course, of course. So one of my favorite brands is actually called Common Air, and
Okay.
they are clean beauty. I think right now they have three products. They have vitamin C, then they have a retinol, then they have a third product that I unfortunately just forgot. But their retinol is amazing. Their vitamin C is really, really great. And all of that is also clean. Clean packaging, no plastic. They're the portions basically come in little capsules, and
Okay.
it's like super easy when you travel a lot, and it gives you the exact amount you need for your face and neck, which is awesome. Then another one we love with tremendous results is Say Beauty, for
Okay.
example. They are, I think, a makeup with skincare combined brand. And we love our makeup that also has that also
Yes.
nourishes skin, right? It's
Sure.
amazing. Yeah. Other brands we really like, for example, Naked Poppy.
Okay.
They have amazing, amazing products. Another brand we recently worked with, they only have one product so far. It's called Full Prolay Skin. They are entirely new on the market, and their moisturizer is nuts.
Oh,
It is
really?
probably one of the best. It's actually a serum, moisturizer serum, hydrating serum, and just from I remember when I first used it on my skin, I was like, wow, that is an amazing, amazing product. And here we had, the same. So they actually went through a full clinical study with instrumentation, with expert skin grading, and their claims weren't in the 100% because you don't get that. In
Right.
in an objective study, there's no
Right.
way that your fine lines and wrinkles will improve by 100%. It's just impossible.
Right.
And they were quite, they were happy with the process, but quite unhappy with their claims. But then when we showed, but this is what SkinCeuticals, the science forward brand SkinCeuticals does, and then they were like, oh yeah, that is actually true. So
Yeah.
yeah, because we conducted a clinical study and not a perception study, that makes a ton of sense. So again, if I see claims that are, percentage wise too high, for me that's a super red flag.
Oh man, I kind of like want to send you a whole list of things that I'm like, what do you think about? But we're not going to get into that now. I want to think because I feel like this is something that, hopefully I feel like the world is shifting. Brands are certainly getting more transparent, and a lot of that has been because of the consumers are more educated, they know how to look, they're doing more research, they talk a lot more, we all talk a lot more. Social media has sort of been the great equalizer in a lot of that. But then
Yeah.
certainly it helps to have experts like yourself on, who really have that third party view and who also have the scientific backing to say yes or no. I feel like I could talk with you for hours about this, Susanne, but in the interest of time, if people want to know more about Citrus Labs, if they want to know more about what you do, if they want to know more about maybe some of your studies, is there somewhere they can go?
Yeah, absolutely. Just check out www.citruslabs.com. And we are always looking for volunteers for our studies. There is a pre-screening process involved, so not everybody gets enrolled. But yeah, if you're interested in becoming a product tester, a subject for a research study, then you can also send an email to hello@citruslabs.com.
Ooh, fun. Now, before you do these, like, so as a lab, do they have to have some safety protocols before you're calling people in to try this?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Okay.
clinical studies are typically approved by an IRB, an institutional review board, that is reviewing studies based on if they are ethical, if there are any risks involved for participants. And then once they are approved, the study, then after that, we start recruitment. And then obviously for each study, there's an exhaustive set of inclusion, exclusion criteria. And based on that, we then screen participants and
Uh,
enroll participants.
Amazing. Now, is this only your base? I love this too. Your Citrus Labs is based in Los Angeles.
We are based in Los Angeles. Most of our studies are conducted nationwide, though.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. All right.
Yeah.
Amazing. Hey, listen, I maybe sign me up. I'm excited. Maybe sign me up if there's something that you think is really, really promising. I want to thank you, Susanne, so much for being on here. I'm going to make sure to get that list of the brands that you work with to put in the show notes so that people can go and check those out for themselves. And just thank you so much for being on today. I feel like this is so fascinating, and I hope that people just have a little bit more information and a little bit more of that inside information to again be able to make these choices for themselves, to be able to decipher some of the data that we're seeing out there.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And of course, if you have questions you want me to pass on to Susanne or her team at Citrus Labs, I'm always happy to do that. You can email us at hello@artbeautypodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and of course, YouTube at Art Beauty Podcast. And as always, we will see you next Tuesday, hopefully a little bit smarter. Bye.